All right, so this is an interesting slide because I got to ask. So I've actually done 2 talks about Babel now. And the last one, the first slide was using Babel in a modern working environment. And I kind of sold David on this talk, and he was like, all right, fine, let's do it. And then the second slide was literally this verbatim. But I forgot that, and I was like, oh, I'll be clever. I'll just say from modern to futuristic. And then I went to go look at the previous slides, and I was like, oh, turns out I'm not as clever as I thought I was. So I'm going to talk to you about Babel. And first, before we get started, so I've been reading a lot of programming books about Forth. Okay, so Forth is a programming language from way back when. And a lot of the books about Forth are really great, just to learn about computing. And there was this phrase I kind of saw a lot of. And it was things like, the phrase was like, appeared in a lot of non-Forth things as well from that era, where it was like, oh, this is a machine that will run Forth or Lisp. This is a Lisp computer or a C computer, right? It was very specific about what the machine could do for the developer. And we cared a lot about that. And then somewhere in the 90s, that kind of changed. I know if anybody has programming in that era, raise your hand and let me know what era it changed, because I'd love to know. But something had changed. And we started talking about what programs were written in. Right? This is a C program. This is a PHP program. This is a Ruby program. And I think how that ties it really into Babel is that I think Babel changes that perspective again. Because we stop talking about what the language can provide, right? And we start talking about how the language can help the author do things easier. Because things are kind of solved. No one, the pure script authors, they don't have to write a read file thing by themselves. The CoffeeScript 2.0, no one's going to write a way to talk to a TCP connection in CoffeeScript. That's already done. The hard part's done on a lot of languages. So we need to start thinking about how we interact with languages. Hopefully that works. OK, so oops. So does anybody know what Babel does? Just shout it out. Say it right here. OK, hit me.
JavaScript translation for.
OK. Transpiler. OK, that's a great keyword. So transpiler. It's actually that's sort of true. Babel used to be one specific thing. It was turning ES6 into ES5. It actually used to be called 6 to 5, right? And it was a way of just using cool new things in JavaScript that are less impressive now than they used to be, right? But it's actually I'll describe it later. So we know it's a transpiler, or we know it turns JavaScript into something else, or things into JavaScript, right? So I'm going to go over some keywords to get started, because there's a lot of things. First, preset. Babel uses this as a group of packages, like a namespace, if you will, right? So it's a collection, a named group of packages, Babel packages. And when I say Babel packages, what I actually mean is an npm package that has some JavaScript that is kind of like a middleware. Does everybody know what a middleware is? Like an express middleware? Sits into a stack, things go in, things go out. So that's what preset is, a collection of packages. A plugin is one of those packages. Plugins can literally do anything or nothing. It's totally fine. They have an in and an out, just like a middleware and express, right? You also see in the ecosystem plugin transform, and this is largely because Babel 6 kind of changed everything, right? Babel 5 was the first iteration, right? It was like, OK, we're no longer 6 to 5. We now do other things, right? We do ES 2016, 2015, ES3. It's wild stuff, right? 6 was like, well, wait a minute. Turns out that's a lot in one package. What if we didn't, right? That's wild. So they made this basically Babel 6, which did nothing. In fact, I've had jokes that it was basically a worse sed. It copied things. And if you don't have any plugins or presets, all Babel does is copy the piece of code and outputs the same exact piece of code. It doesn't do anything, right? That's all. It doesn't do anything at all. It'll warn you that, hey, you're not doing anything, just in case you're worried. But that's all it does. Plugin transform basically was a sort of lingo that kind of evolved for packages that specifically, because a plugin can do anything. It can touch your file system. It can make an HTTP request. It can do anything. Plugin transform was specifically we were saying, oh, well, this actually just happens to talk about syntax, right? Like adding features or removing things like that. So if you see this, it's just a fancier a plugin that's kind of telling you, hey, I specifically deal with syntax. OK, so we heard transpiler, right? So the interesting thing about this word is that it comes from the root word, trans, right? This prefix that means cross. But actually, like I told you, Babel doesn't actually do anything by itself, right? It just copies, so it's the same. And then there's actually a word for that, syspyler, because sys means same. So Babel can be both. And the differentiator here is that a transpiler takes from one source and its context to another source and its context. For example, opal.rb, which is Ruby that gets transpiled to JavaScript. Now, there's a lot of things, I don't know if any of you know Ruby, there's a lot of differences in how Ruby and JavaScript behave, right? For example, when you require something in Ruby, that's global, that's everywhere, right? So there's no such thing as like having multiple versions of a package for your project because it's global, right? Like that code will be overwritten if you do two different ones, right? So how, like the Opal RB crew have to explicitly make that work inside of Node. They have to actually make JavaScript worse in order to get it to work like Ruby, right? So that's transpile because we're actually shifting a barrier. And syspile is like essentially this. Is sort of the motto I've come up with. You can't break the floor, right? An if condition in any Babel plugin, no Babel plugin can remain a syspiler middleware and also break how something worked, right? So if you have some gnarly ES3 code from the early aughts, and you paste it into any of your web projects today using Babel, guess what will happen? It'll work, because you can't break it, right? You can't break what used to work. That's not an option in the JavaScript world. Once something gets added to JavaScript, it never goes away, for the most part. You kind of have to work around it in the future. But you can add things, right? We have an import syntax, right, that requires code in a supposedly statically analyzable way, right? We have this new import function that does a promise-based require, right? So we can add things, we can't break things. So that's the real difference here. Okay, so the other thing is that a note here is that Babel 7's coming out. It's RC4 right now. So like play with it if you want to. It's got some cool new additions. It's faster. Yeah, it's better, basically, it's better. But also some of these things I'm going to talk about are specific to Babel 7. A few of them, but some of them. Okay, so I remember the last time I gave a talk and David was like, next one has to have pragmatic stuff in it. So, David. So I'm going to talk to you about some plugins, some Babel things that will make your code better and make you better at writing code. And these should be in your Babel. So when I say in your Babel, let's be clear about this. So you know what I'm going to think. I can't just drag it over. All right. So I was going to show you my file system, which contains it. You need two things to work with Babel. One, you need to install an npm package that is the Babel thing, as well as Babel itself. Two, you need a Babel RC or somewhere as a file or somewhere in your package JSON that contains the list of the things you want your code to run through, right? The stack of changes. And that's it. That's the only thing you need. And then you need to actually use Babel on that. It's like Webpack has a Babel loader that you just shove in there, and it does basically runs your code through Babel. You can do it manually. That's how I do it. You can put it into Gulp. There's tons of ways to do it. But the only things you need are the presets, the packages themselves, Babel core, and the Babel RC configuration to tell Babel how to work. So these are important. You should have these in your list of dependencies if you're doing modern JavaScript today. They will make everything better. So first, Babel preset env. So who here uses Babel to target multiple platforms? Like older versions of Chrome or older versions of IE? OK, this is the common case. I'm actually surprised about the lack of hands. So this is what 6.5 was supposed to do, right? And then it also expanded to say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if everybody knew how to merge two objects together, the object destructure syntax? Wouldn't it be cool if you could like group up remaining elements in an array into one variable, right? The rest operator, rest the syntax. And not every browser had this, right? Like Chrome still doesn't have the spread operator, I don't think, for objects. Certainly, IE6 doesn't have a lot of things, like they don't have constructors, right, for classes. So that was kind of like Babel's early sort of like tool use, was making things so I could write in one single way and like target a whole bunch of things. That's all this now. So preset.env is a collection of packages, right? Where you can specify what platforms you want to work with. I want to work with Node 0.8. I want my code to also be able to work with IE 9. I want it to be able to work with Chrome 54 and every version of Safari. And it will figure out the common denominators and generate code for you that will work on every one of those platforms, no matter what you're using. Now, the real power of this, I think, is actually being able to create multiple bundles that work for each one, right? Because you don't want to have all this mess running in your Node server, your Node, what's Node at, like 11 now? Node 11 server, and also have list your Safari 9 as well. Like, there's no reason to have both of those using the same code. Next up, Minify. Who here uses Uglify.js? OK, great. Guess what? This is better. Like, if it doesn't equal, it beats it. What it doesn't win on is some speed test, but you should not care about that. Like, that's your CI's job. Like, you should be doing other important things, not waiting on your minification service. So this is just a group of plugins that do things. It removes closures, unused closures. You know how that special browserify envify, which takes environment variables and replaces process.env or window.env to just replace that value. That's cool. That's built into that. Done. First of all, it's out. Uglify.js 2 is not out. And Uglify.js does not handle newer syntaxes. So you kind of just have to use this or the newer Uglify.js 2. But also, it's better. So it's just built in. It can do more things. All right, so here's another big one. I'm not going to ask how many people use React. So what this will do is it hoists up your common React constants, so they're only referenced once. It turns classes that have no lifecycle or state into pure functions, which makes your React code faster, and a whole bunch of other stuff, so that your code in production is smaller and faster if it's using React. So these should be in there. Oh, this is another one that's a last minute add. So I consider that's a must have. So who here has ever done utils.js and then imported from random file paths? OK, yeah. See, that's some shameful hands. This solves that, right? You can basically set up key values. Say, hey, import x from @internal/utils. And it will treat it as a package that you've installed. But it's actually local. So it basically says, hey, whenever there's an import statement to this key, to this token, instead import from a local file. Replace that when we've transpiled, right? So this is powerful because it makes your code much cleaner. Instead of having utils.js in some root directory and then doing import x from let's see, // // // oh shit, it is actually .. So this solves that problem. No, don't do that anymore. And those are I think must-haves these days. If you're on Babel 5, get to Babel 6, you can use these. If you're on Babel 6, use these plugins. They cost nothing and they make everything better. That's the best deal you'll get in software development. OK, so here's the cool shit, right? So this is for the future. So who's here using a flow type? Yeah? OK. All right. What about TypeScript? OK. So if you've ever wanted to have it so that your functions have type annotations, so that you can say, hey, this concatenation function, it takes a string and returns a string. And the system will scream at you when you're not doing that, you can use these. But the great thing, this is really what said, Babel told me, showed me, because Flow existed for a while, since the last time I gave this talk. But it doesn't do anything. It actually, the core crux of this function, this one, all they do is they take your code with type annotations and remove the type annotations. And that sounds terrible, right? But you don't care about type annotations in production. You don't want your screen to be yeah, you tried to update your account, but guess what? That object was actually an array. If that doesn't matter to your user, I hope not. The developers are the worst customer. So this is oh, wow, all it does is remove the type annotations, because the next step to these things is the other key are the TypeScript binary and the Flow binary. And what those do is they they read your code with these annotations still attached, right, the source code. And they tell you when you've got type issues. So I realized that like Babel plugins aren't just about changing the code. They can be pieces to an entire puzzle that makes you a better developer, right? All this does, like I said, all this does is just remove the type annotations. You know, it's a fancy sed. Or I guess a less fancy sed. This is so let's say you do want to tell the user that the type annotations were wrong. You can do that. Like what it does is it looks at your type annotations and puts in throw errors after checking the type. So like if you really want, like in development, let's be honest, in development, if you really want your developers to stop shipping code that has the wrong like axon undefined without accounting for it, like there you go. It'll break your code and say, hey, guess what? You need to be better. At least that's what it tells me. So like this is who uses has code coverage, and they probably use assemble, right? Like okay, so here's a thing. This is like sort of a gray area. When you're using Babel, you have two types of code, right? Before and after. The after's bad because it's mutated. It has all these polyfills, a bunch of stuff. If you throw your code coverage tool at the output, it's going to be like, what are you doing? There's like thousands of lines of code that you're not using. But that's not true. It's just that those are like sets up for when you do need them. So what this does is it basically sets another tool to be able to use the source code effectively, right? So this is another one of those pieces of the puzzle things. Let me switch real quick. OK, so I'm getting close to the end of my slides here. This is a weird one I found recently, internationalization. You have strings. They have different text for French, whatever. Why don't you just pop that in your stack and suddenly you have internationalization? I mean, suddenly after you do reams of work to write the different translations. But once you've got that easy work done, now you can make a machine like fill it in for you, right? Object spread, you're probably using this. Typescript uses this. Typescript, actually, the Typescript thing comes with this built into it. Hey, wouldn't it be cool to just like get parts of an object or mash two objects together? Yep, totally. I'm just realizing I'm nearing 20 minutes. So decorators, there's a lot of talk about this. It's hard. Ycats is like, oh, I would love it if I could decorate object class functions. And a lot of people are like, what are classes? And so like they made this, and it's like, hey, but then suddenly started putting them on top of functions, just regular old functions. And should have been an entirely different spec, so they had to like do this, which is weird. So this is only available in 7. But you can do cool things. And if I could, I would show them to you. But like, wouldn't it be cool have you ever done like A function, B function, like nesting functions? Decorators, you can like have a syntax for making that look a little bit cleaner. So this is the cool, and I'm going to rush through this because I'm already over time. So wouldn't it be cool if you had imports that only happened in development or imports that only happen in production, right? So you can only have certain code that actually shows up in either of those environments. Wouldn't it be cool if you could write comments that say, hey, this code should evaluate to this value or something that looks pattern matches to it. But here's the real value, taco script. All right, this is like, so I made a lot of promises in the first presentation. But this is it. Like this is what I was talking about because I was like, oh, there's this. I had all these like, I was showing all these cool imports that were like really janky and that like, I was like, what? Okay. And this is what I was getting at. Like, so I discovered this person. So Forval is her name, and she's like an engineer like the rest of us, and she used Babel plugins to make an entirely different language. Like, look at that JavaScript, and this is TypeScript. And like, there's a lot to unpack here, but there's way more. So here's awesome. Wouldn't it be cool if you only had the syntax only meant one thing? That'd be nice. But also, like, white space is great, right, for a lot of people. And whatever you could do ever. Wouldn't it be cool if you could use words like Ruby to mean these things? Like a lot of words, right? A lot of them. Wouldn't it be cool if you could like write things out like other languages without this very terse? I don't like ternary operators, but like, hey, this looks a little bit easier to read, right? Arrow functions are nice. What if you could do more of them, right? What if you had a syntax for doing implicit returns versus explicit returns? What if you could also do that for class properties? Doesn't that look cooler? right? And the great thing is that they made Babel plugins for each of these things. So if you just want one piece of this, have at it. Strudel, by the way, is an @ sign. It's the @ sign. It's like if you've ever written this dot function, now you can write the @ sign function. And I was like, what are you talking? That's an @ sign. And then I looked up what a strudel is. It's totally a strudel. That's a strudel key for me now. Anyways, that's it. Hire me if you think this tells you anything about that.